What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the GBA podcast. This is the platform where guilty by association meets gritty blissful ambiguity. And this is also the platform where we highlight real people, real voices, real opinions, and definitely real stories. I have a very interesting guest today. I actually hate always start saying that because I only bring interesting guests, by the way. But yes, and let's find out who she is, what she does, and why she's here. So, who are you and what do you do? And
Hi,
welcome to the pod.
thank you. It's great to be here. My name is Mel, and I recently started getting a lot of fame on TikTok because I've been talking a lot about what's going on in Palestine right now. Um, since October 7th, and a little bit before that, but since October 7th, and the social media attention has gotten much more. My wife and I actually go on lives and we talk about Palestine. We educate people on Israeli history. I myself am Israeli. I got my Israeli citizenship a few years back, but I grew up in America. I grew up in a conservative Jewish family. I had my Judaism tied tightly to Zionism my entire life, whether it was from day school, in my Sunday school, later on before my bat mitzvah, and then all throughout college. I did all of the free trips you could possibly imagine to Israel. I was probably one of the biggest Zionists you've ever met. And it wasn't until 2021 that I kind of started unlearning that and realizing that there's a lot more that I was never taught about and not a lot more that I didn't know. And
There,
that's where I am today.
well, apart from that, I think you're just way more than that because I mean, I witnessed you just once on TikTok Live, and it's very interesting that you talk about TikTok fame when there is. Let's start there, actually. Anyways, because there is a lot to unpack. You already said so much, but I just want to start with the TikTok fame because according to Nikki Haley, watching 30 minutes of TikTok a day makes you 17% more anti-Semitic.
That's a really interesting statistic. I wonder where she got that from.
So, how this happened was this guy, I believe his name was Anthony Goldblum. He commissioned this statistic, and she kind of like quoted it wrong because what they do is they tell you numbers and they tell you everything, and she just worded it that way because she's obviously one of the big advocates for banning TikTok. Do you think TikTok is really the problem when it comes to anti-Semitism?
I think that there's a really dangerous conflation between criticism of Israel and the government and what they're doing in Gaza right now and actual anti-Semitism. As someone who has experienced anti-Semitism my whole life, and especially after I started talking about Palestine, even my own fellow Jews have been very anti-Semitic to me, sent me death threats, told me I'm not Jewish, told me I'm a traitor to my race, to my people, that I'm a sellout. A lot of vitriol, and I think social media opens you up to that in general. But I don't think that TikTok itself is the reason why you see more people that are becoming more of a bigot one way or another. I think TikTok allows for discoverability, unlike other social media platforms. So people that are across the world from you can find you and listen to you. And if you have an educational message, which I always strive to do, you can learn so much. I myself have learned so much on TikTok, whether it be about current events, new recipes, especially this issue. I've been able to connect with Palestinians on the ground, some journalists as well, giving us like a live view of what's going on in a way that we've never been able to do before. And I think it really scares politicians who are kind of betting on us being ignorant and not knowing what's going on in the world and just taking our butts to the polls and being very quiet and not dissenting about what's going on. And I think it doesn't help that all of our politicians are bought and paid for by the Israel lobby because they think that any criticism of their biggest ally is going to be something that they need to stop. And the way that they've done that previously is by calling it anti-Semitic, even on college campuses. Anytime there's a pro-Palestine march or even not on campus, the ADL labels it as an anti-Semitic hate crime.
It's
So even
insane.
if we're not even talking about Judaism or Jewish people, we're just
Yeah.
talking about freeing Palestine, and they're like, oh, that's an anti-Semitic hate crime.
Yeah, and that's you being pro the age group.
Yep.
So I want to dismantle one thing right away before anyone tries to come at you for that. Did you actually get on social media to get famous for speaking out against the Israeli government?
I honestly, I'm terrified of becoming famous and people knowing who I am.
Oh,
I got on TikTok and it started with me and my wife kind of going on the Zio lives and talking to the people that were watching and telling them that some of the things they're saying are just straight up false. A lot of the narratives that they speak on, we call it the script because they all say the same thing. They're the Zionist talking points that I was taught my whole life throughout my Jewish education. And none of them actually have to do with Jewish values or the Jewish religion. So as we started doing that and debunking these people, more and more people were following us, more and more people were keeping up with us, asking us to do our own live events. Um, Previously, I had like 1,000 followers. I would go live every now and again, just like casually and talking about it. But because it wasn't as popular during the current events, people weren't listening as closely. But I think that people like to hear my wife and I talk about it because we are very educated on the topic. We come with quotes and facts and statistics, and we're very easily able to diffuse situations where a lot of misinformation is being spread. We
okay.
actually get, yeah, go ahead.
So tell me, no, finish what you was gonna say.
I was just going to say we get like probably 20 to 30 requests every part of the day just to join lives and talk to people and help them understand the truth about things.
Well, why do you feel the need to do that?
I think, well, number one, I spent my whole life being a Zionist and saying this propaganda to people anytime I got the chance. And I feel like, number one, this is a way for me to kind of make up for that, the spreading of misinformation and the propaganda that I was taught. And also, when people know the truth about things, they're more able to make their own decisions. They're more willing to take action. And I think this is an issue that our government and our education system does its best to keep under wraps, and they don't make resources readily available about it. And there's a lot of, I would say, fogginess around this issue. Even in Israel itself, like you can't learn about the Nakba or any of Palestinian history. You don't learn about Palestinians in school. The only thing you ever hear about them is that they're all T words. Um, and I've met many Palestinians during my time living in Israel, during my time on TikTok, and I think it's really disingenuous for people to be saying such false narratives about them and about their history. And I want more people to know about it.
I love that. And that's amazing because I think it's the hardest thing, for me. Um Obviously this the Palestine situation is nothing new, but I've never really encountered so many Zionists, and in the beginning it saddened me. It really saddened me to the point where on one time I had to say I am actually extremely sorry that the Israeli education system failed y'all. And I'm extremely sorry that the core values and the morals that we all learn from very young are so, mm, I don't know, like I don't even have the right word for it, like misconstrued in if you know what I mean. But can you tell me three things that you guys learned from very early, like that is supposed to, steer you towards becoming a Zionist or having that kind of mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that really steered me in that direction towards Zionism was growing up and going to a Jewish day school. I was taught Hebrew, I learned about Israeli history, and I learned about Jewish holidays all tied together as part of my like developing Jewish identity. So all my teachers would tell me, you have to go to Israel one day. It's your birthright. It's a place for the Jewish people. And I connected with it in that way. And then I was never taught any of the actual history of what happened in the country and like how it became a country and who suffered as a result of that. And then in college as well, all of the Israel education I got through the different Jewish programs I was a part of, whether it be Hillel or Jewish Experience or Chabad, none of them ever talked about Palestine, about any of the history really. And the only things they taught you is you have to be careful about anti-Semitism. You know, a lot of people are just pro-Palestine because they're anti-Semitic. And I believed a lot of this for a long time because I had experienced a lot of anti-Semitism when I was younger and in college. There had been events that happened. Sometimes people would graffiti certain symbols on known Jewish fraternities'
Crazy.
homes and cars.
Hmm.
Um, like any other minority, we face discrimination, and it's not anything special about being Jewish, but that's kind of how they make it like seem to you. They make it seem like this is a real problem, and it is, but this is something that you personally need to fight by shutting down any conversations about Palestine. They had us going to like Students for Justice in Palestine meetings to protest them. Um, Anytime we spoke about it, they would just call them T words or that they were supporting T. It was That was the narrative that I was always taught. And then living there is when I really saw the truth. I think what you're taught and then what you experience are two very different things. At least for me, being in the schools, seeing what they're learning. I was lucky to have one Palestinian student in my school, and it was very obvious that he wasn't getting all of the support that he needed in the classroom. His classmates would bully him all the time and like insult him by using the word Arab, which is like a
Oh,
very common curse word in their language. Um, and I just started seeing little things like that, and it started to make me question everything that I had been taught. And then in May of 2021, during Ramadan, there was a news, I don't know if it was a video or an article that I saw that the IOF had raided Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, during prayer time. And to me, like religion has always been something that's very close to my heart. I've always felt very protective over my Judaism. Like I was going to synagogue and there were police cars outside, like protecting us from hate crimes. So seeing that was really painful to me. It was like, what are they doing wrong that they deserve to be tear gassed or pew-pewed at, or, you know, all of these things that were happening at that time. And then there was the subsequent rocket attacks that actually reached Tel Aviv, I think, for the first time. And I experienced that, like living in Tel Aviv. Um, for about 2 weeks, there was rockets kind of raining down all over Israel. And I had for the first time seen the different narrative that I had been taught, because what I'd been taught is Israel just defends itself. They never initiate, they never do anything wrong. These people just don't like us because we're Jewish. So they're always trying to hurt us. They're always trying to do S bombings and all of this stuff. That's why we have the walls. That's why we have the checkpoints and all the things that we have. But I saw a direct reaction to something that was really awful happening to innocent people. And that's when I started to kind of look for more answers on some of the things that I had been taught and some of the things that I had learned.
I was always very, very, I don't know, intrigued by Judaism as a religion. I was intrigued by it, like the language. I wanted to learn this, and I still do. This doesn't have to do anything with what the Zios are doing right now. And I know exactly how it is. I'm a Muslim, and I know how it is when your religion is being hijacked for a political purpose. From how you sound already talking about it, I can tell it's definitely, yeah, it hit deep. It definitely hit deep. Tell me about how you felt during that time and what was going on when you had that change, when the rockets were coming at Tel Aviv. I mean, obviously you were scared, right?
Yeah, I think it wasn't a happy and peaceful time for me at all. Like my
Mhm.
wife and I were terrified. She was a lot more anxious and reactive towards it than I was.
Mhm.
But I was still very scared. Like in the middle of the night, sometimes we would wake up to the sirens and have to run to our shelter or to a stairwell, wherever we were. And this went on for 2 weeks, so we didn't really sleep well. We couldn't go into school and teach. I don't even think we were doing like the Zoom lessons at the time. So we were kind of just stuck inside, like waiting for it to blow over. But we also have some friends who, while we were there, who worked for B'Tselem and Gisha, and they were kind of telling us a lot of the background that we hadn't ever had before. And we started doing our own research. Norman Finkelstein is one I remember most favorably. I remember watching like a 2-hour lecture on like 2x speed. And I was just like, my jaw was dropping the whole time because there was so much that I hadn't been taught and so much that I didn't know. And like hearing it from a Holocaust survivor, a child of
Yeah.
Holocaust survivors who lived in Israel, who's Israeli, say all these things, I was like, oh my gosh, like, why wasn't this taught to us? And why are we conflating this, political goal and this political ideology with our religion, which is completely against everything that Zionism stands for?
I mean, Norman Finkelstein is a very remarkable personality, as you said as well. And I think to listen to him is definitely worth it. But can you explain to the people who don't know, because we still do have part of the audience that are not so familiar with the whole background of what's going on. What is the Gisha, for example? Like you mentioned that.
So Gisha actually works with Palestinians in Gaza to get them medical care in Israel if they need it, immediate medical care. They help them get permits to come and work, and several other things. It's a nonprofit. So a friend of mine would go frequently back and forth from Gaza and Tel Aviv to as part of her job. And my other friend who worked for B'Tselem, B'Tselem is Israel's human rights organization. And they were the organization, for example, that did the investigation into Shireen Abu Akleh's death.
Wow.
So they also wrote a report on Israeli apartheid, one of the most like well-known reports. And it's harrowing because I know that a lot of people who kind of deny what's going on and what the current state of things are, they refer to organizations like Amnesty International
Mm.
as like T supporters or like against human rights. But when Israel itself has a human rights organization and they come out with this very harrowing report, this very damning report, it's very hard to point to that and say, oh, like that's fake news. Um, so they had a lot of insight into what was going on, and they were able to kind of educate us in the beginning because we had a lot of questions, as many people who kind of see the curtain fall away about anything would probably have.
But I think this would be a very hurtful moment if you realize, wow, the thing that I grew up in, that I was made to believe is the real thing, is actually like kind of like breaking down right in front of me, because now I'm realizing that it was all a lie. This is like this, I would probably question myself who I am at that point.
Yeah, I think for me, it was really difficult to come to terms with initially. And I will say that I'm still unlearning a lot of the things that I've learned my whole life because you don't just undo 25, 26 years
Yes.
of brainwashing in like a day or a month even.
What is the hardest thing for you to unlearn? Like, what are
I
you
think
struggling with?
I lived in Israel for almost 3 years. Um, and I have a lot of fond memories of my time there. And I think one of the things I struggle the most with is remembering how lovely it was to live amongst like all of my people, to be in such a beautiful place, having the freedom to kind of move freely through the place and see all of the religious places that I learned about my whole life. I hold that experience very fondly, but it's in direct contrast to what Palestinians go through on a daily basis. And reconciling that in my head and kind of not like really hating myself for having those
Um,
experiences and kind of being a quote unquote colonizer myself, like that has been really difficult for me because I have all these positive memories and experiences in Israel and with my Israeli friends, and then kind of seeing what it is and how I understand it today
I
and
mean, please don't
holding
hate
those two things.
yourself. Please, this is not even, no, no, no. This is real, because then we all need to start hating ourselves for living in countries who are supporting this G side, and I don't think this is the purpose of it. Like self-hate is more destructive than anything. You need to be strong, and even if it's not like, okay, you're defending your religion, which is straight up hijacked, and it's important to be strong for that.
Absolutely.
So, one thing that I myself struggle with a lot is, censorship. And I sometimes I am um surprised about the censorship in Israel. If I'm not wrong, there is a lot of censorship going on, because sometimes when you have people search for something on Google that we can clearly see here, they don't. And how is this that people in Israel don't understand that? For example, you have Ethiopian Israel, Jewish people that are there, and they don't get treated the same way. Israeli Arabs, they don't have the same rights like Israeli Jews. Why don't people see that? Where's the disconnect, you think?
I think it's very similar to what we see in the States around Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
To me, if people aren't experiencing something themselves and they benefit from white privilege, they have blinders on because they're living this life and they're not, unless they have a personal connection to someone who has a different experience, they're never going to run into it. They're never going to have a time where their worldview is challenged without that personal connection. And someone who is not, did not grow up there, did not have the Israeli schooling system kind of shape who I was able to see patterns and see things. My wife is also Black, so she started to see the signs of oppression and discrimination very quickly when we were there. And I'm very privileged to have her perspective as well, because she was able to point things out and help me to see beyond my own white privilege of things that I didn't necessarily see. Um, and then once you start to see it, you can't really unsee it. We had, for example, a refugee school down the street from where we lived, because in Israel, they keep anyone who's not a Jewish person, Jewish citizen, out of the main school system. They keep them separate in refugee schools, and they call them refugees. So all of the workers that come there from the Philippines, from Sri Lanka, a lot of Sudanese, they are completely segregated from the Israeli education system. They also don't have any type of citizenship rights. They could be deported at any time. And I met people who were considered refugees and became very close with them. And I saw how much different their experiences were from mine. Also, just learning about the history, about how some of these groups were treated outside of Israel and through my own research helped me to see those things. But if you're living there and you're not having any, I guess, anything impeding you or like preventing you from living your fullest life, you're not going to seek those things out.
Wow. So, as far as I'm informed, DNA tests are prohibited in Israel. Is that true? Do you know about
So DNA tests are not illegal, but
it?
they're not as easily attainable as they are in the US, for example. You can't just go on ancestry.com and order one, but you can get one through a doctor or through a court order. Um, but most people don't.
But
Just
how do
rat.
I prove that I'm Jewish? Like how am I going there? Like I could go there if I had, like, let's say I do the ancestry thing or whatever, and I'm 3% Jewish. Can I just go there and claim like the country and say, hey, I want to become a citizen?
So the citizenship process requires you to have one Jewish grandparent, and they don't actually ask you for a DNA test. They
Oh,
ask you to talk about your Jewish history. If you went to synagogue, if you went to Hebrew school or day school, they ask you for like the names of those institutions, and they ask you to share your parents' Hebrew names if they have them. And um, what's the other? They require you to have a letter from a rabbi that knows you and your family, and you can vouch for the fact that you're a part of a Jewish community.
the reason why I'm asking this because it feels really weird if you have this loophole in the States where convicted pedophiles use the law of return, and I'm just trying to understand why Israel, who calls itself a democratic country, would do that.
I I don't know. I personally had to get a background check in the States from the FBI before I was able to get citizenship, but
Goodness.
I don't know how that happens. I don't know what processes they follow. I know it's true. I've seen, a lot about that throughout my research, and it
Mhm.
really scares me. Um, but I don't know how they kind of slide through that system and they're able to get through.
And why don't Israeli people, why are they not able to see that this is an apartheid state when you have segregation, clear segregation going on? Also in the West Bank, when they say West Bank is actually Palestinian, right?
I think because they don't see it, it doesn't exist to them. Because they don't have to go through hours long checkpoints to leave their front door, because they don't have to drive on separate roads. They don't have to inconvenience themselves in any way that
But
Palestinians go through on a daily basis.
but don't they hear about it? Don't they see it on the internet? That's why I was talking about censorship. Like I feel like there is a big chunk missing for them.
I think that their media suppresses things like with Shireen Abu Akleh. Like they'll immediately deny that they were a part of it, and that's what they'll put out to their public. And then they'll come out and say that they did it after it's been proven that they did it, and they won't really give it a lot of media attention. So people aren't really tuned in. There's also a general sentiment that the reason why there's a wall in the West Bank and the reason why we have checkpoints and all of these restrictions on Palestinians is because of T attacks, is because they see them all as T words and that they need to be kept separate from Jews because they hate all Jews. But in reality, they're just living post Nakba in their own land as prisoners, basically. And they're watching people slowly take more and more of their land. And they don't see it that way because they all have this sense of entitlement to the country, to the land, because of our religion's history there.
I mean, nobody's denying at this point that Jewish people have ties to the land. They've been living there for centuries. They've been living there together with Christians, Muslims, and whoever else was living there. It's just the way that it's done and how far one is like they are willing to go is what's scary, absolutely scary. Um, Let's talk a little bit about the time. So when you and your wife were in Israel, you talked about the fun memories. And I also wanted to say, I don't want you to feel bad for them. It's absolutely fine that you had these memories and because you came to terms with the truth and you're willing to accept the truth, even though it's hard, that doesn't delete and erase the good times that you have somewhere. Um, when was the point where you said, "Nah, we can't do this. We we got to get out of here"?
So last summer, actually, 2022, there was another escalation where there were rockets coming into Tel Aviv. And while we were there, we had taken a month in the US. I think it was June, and then came back. And when we came back, we just felt like we couldn't be there anymore. And then what really pushed us to pack all our stuff and leave was that second escalation that we lived through. Um, just seeing how people were talking about it, and we had several negative experiences prior to that. Um, while we were
Mm.
there, and we just felt like the energy was off. We couldn't stay healthy. We kept getting sick. We just were
Wow.
getting depressed. Like our mental health was really struggling just because we were seeing the truth so clearly that we couldn't be a part of it anymore.
Can you talk about some of the situations that you experienced that made you be like, nah, this is sickening. And I'm only asking you for this because there's really people who don't understand, and I need them to have a very clear picture. Only if you don't mind talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One example that comes to mind is a group date that my wife and I went on with some of our roommates during our Teach English program.
Mhm.
We met up with a group of guys who were, going to see my roommates. They had met off a dating app because the only thing we could really do during the pandemic was like meet up with random people and like go get ice cream or go for a walk on the beach because everything was closed. Um, and two of the guys were making fun of their friend, the entire time. His friend was half Yemeni Jewish, so he was technically an Arab Jew.
Yeah.
And they were ragging on him, calling him a T word, saying vile things to the point where we all got up and left. Because it was just so unacceptable to us that they were being like just blatantly racist. Um, there was a lot of experiences where I was talking one-on-one with Israelis, and they said things like, during a game we were playing, the question was like, name an unpopular opinion you have. And said straight up, I think some races are superior to others. And I was like, say more. I don't know why I said that, but I was like, say more about that. He was like, well, I think, Arabs are definitely inferior. Like they're just dumb and they just don't like have the same level of intelligence as us. And I was like, I'm really upset that I asked you to say more because that was not what I was expecting to hear. And also, aren't you Arab yourself? Like, do you, is that a race or is that an ethnicity? Like, there's just like so much ignorance and so much like bigotry just casually in the society that it makes it really uncomfortable. And um, we found a cleaning lady through a Facebook group, and she was like one of the most wonderful people. She's like one of our closest friends now. Her
Um,
name's I'm not going to say her name because I don't
yeah,
want
yeah, yeah,
to
don't.
I don't want to say her identity, but
Mm,
she was a South African refugee, and the only work that she could do was cleaning, um, because it
houses,
was
yeah.
the only thing you could really do without citizenship or a bank account or any of the things that other Israelis are
Please,
privileged to
yeah.
have. And just some of the experiences she would share with us about how some of her clients would treat her. She had a client fart on her, like just vile, vile stories, um, about the things that people have said to her, done to her, because she's black. She had to wear a Star of David around her neck when she would be on the streets because otherwise people would try to jump her or hurt her because she wasn't a Jewish Israeli and was very um, scared for her life a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
hearing stories like that, that's really kind of what led to us feeling the way that we felt and needing to leave.
Especially if your wife is black, as you said, she couldn't be with us today, unfortunately. But did she experience anything herself, or hope like or not really?
I will say that she did have privilege being an American and being an English speaker and
Wow.
being Jewish. But
Oh, she's
she
Jewish, yeah.
but she did experience several microaggressions and just blatant racism while we were there. We worked at a WeWork office because we were both working remotely, and sometimes we would get a cab home at night because we didn't want to walk in the dark. And some of the cab drivers would say things like, "Oh, like, do you clean there? You work there as a cleaning person?" Just like
Mm.
straight off the bat. And she's like,
Mm.
"No, I have an office there." And they were like, "Really? You have an office there?" Like, because they don't think that people of color could like have these types of jobs outside of being a cleaner, or I don't know where that came from. I was on a job interview once and someone said the N-word to me like casually in conversation. People also like say it like with their chest over there. Like they don't see anything wrong with it. They call people slurs, just based on race. They have a special slur for Black people that we've heard multiple times just walking in the street. Um, they,
Extreme, very extreme.
yeah, it's
I just
not like a pleasant experience.
No, 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 not at all. I can definitely imagine that. What I find surprising is that, like that they're not willing to accept Arab Jews or Black Jews, but at the same time, I hear that so much where a lot of Jewish people would say, but we have so much in common with Black people. And it's always funny when you say this only from a distance, like you can stay over there, we're here, but we still have a lot in common. So you gotta be on our side, so to speak. Um, your family, how did they receive that you basically kind of like changed lanes?
I think something that I'm really grateful for is that neither one of my sisters ever did birthright or had any real connection to Israel or
Mm,
Judaism in general. Like we celebrated the holidays as a family, but I had way more Jewish education than they did. I went to day school for 6 years while my other siblings are younger than me, so they didn't go as long. So they never really felt the desire to go there or develop that kind of identity with the place as
mhm.
much as they did with just their religion. So for them, they see this completely objectively. They see what's happening in Gaza and they're like, this is wrong straight up. Um,
Oh,
my parents, I wouldn't say that they're very educated on the topic or
yeah.
know a lot of the history. Um, they kind of are blissfully ignorant about a lot of things, so they didn't really disagree strongly with me. They just asked me a lot of questions, um, and I try to teach them as much as I can. But it can be difficult. Both of them voted for the Flaming Hot Cheeto, so
So I spoke to somebody last week and on on an episode, and I asked him where is the disconnect in having a moral compass and values, like just seeing that unaliving innocent people and babies and kids is just wrong. It's just inhumane. And he said to me, he said, I think Zios do know that, but they just deep inside they do know that, but they wouldn't admit to it because the need to defend the country and the Zionism is bigger. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I think a lot of them are raised with a lot of fear. They're raised with this very limited worldview that people who look different from them automatically hate them because they're Jewish. And that's the reason that they're taught that all of the attacks have happened in Israel. So they think that these people hate them just for being who they are. So why should they care about them if they're being mass unalived, for example? And they're also like super dehumanized in Israeli society. Like they're, I don't know if you've seen the clips, but like Israelis will say with their chest, there are no innocent people in Gaza. There are no innocent
Yeah.
people in Palestine. Palestine, where's that? Like they basically deny their existence and their history. They talk about even the founding of the country as, we just wanted to have a safe place for Jews and all of the Arabs attacked us, but they neglect to say, what actually happened. And I think
Do you think, and do you think we can this can be fixed? Do you think that this is gonna be like Jewish people are gonna at some point accept Arabs as humans and Palestinians as humans? And if so, how do you think this could be achieved? I know this is a heavy question. I'm just asking your opinion. Like you don't like it's not about, you know?
I think the only way that Israel is going to do the right thing, the Israeli government's going to do the right thing, is if they
Mhm.
have immense amounts of international pressure.
Which is happening right now, or do you think it's not enough?
I don't think it's enough right now. I think it
Mhm.
needs to be on the level of apartheid South Africa. I think there needs to be sanctions. I think the US needs to stop supporting them. I
Do you
think
see
that
that happening? It's very
with the
hard, right?
with the current government, probably not, but we are going to be able to replace a lot of the people in next year's election. And I hope that we don't have to wait that long to kind of give ourselves a fresh start with who's representing us and who's making these laws and making these decisions. I think the international pressure will eventually push the US as well to take a different stance. But I think as far as people on the ground, there needs to
Yeah.
be like an unlearning of the fear mongering that Israel does from like day one. I think there needs to be normalization. There needs to be neutral interaction. There needs to be a complete like redo of the education system, um, to just start teaching them young that these other people also have a right to be here, have a history here, and they don't want to unalive you. I think undoing some of that fear is the first step. I don't think that we can just open the floodgates and everyone is going to get along because there's a lot of hate and fear.
What do you think about the IOF, as in they are just basically the country's security?
So what's really troubling for me with this is that the IOF was a combination of T groups like the Haganah, the Irgun, all of these groups that were classified as T groups by the rest of the world, and then it became this army after committing many, many atrocities during the Nakba and before that. And now it's kind of just like this system that keeps people, as soon as they turn 18, they need to go into the army to defend their country because they're taught that because we're Jewish, we will always have people that want to unalive us. We will always have people that want to take our right to be here away because they're not taught the truth. So they see it as, an honor. If you don't join the IOF, you literally go to jail. Um, and it's also like a huge social status thing. Like everybody has like a unit, and like if they're a part of specific brigades, it's like a big topic of conversation when you're doing job interviews, for example. And you're frowned upon if you don't do the service. They see it as this is the honorable thing to do. And as you may know, a lot of people from outside of Israel will come and serve in the army. I know several people from the States that went and served in the IOF, because they think it's their duty to kind of protect our people. But I don't think if the apartheid state didn't exist anymore, that they would need this incredibly robust army to exist to begin with. I think that it's a militarized state, and a militarized state requires a large military force. And I don't think that it's beneficial for anybody. I mean, something that my wife and I talked about is like, there's a good chance that a lot of the kids we taught in school are not going to make it past their service and aren't going to see a full life because of the situation and because of what they're being forced to live through. And to think that every single generation is going to have to go through that trauma, is going to have to go to serve in the IOF, is going to have to see things that they won't be able to unsee. It it's painful. And I don't think Israelis should have to live that way either. Constant fear, constant duress about always worrying about somebody wanting to unalive them. I don't think it's healthy for them either. And it's scary to live that way.
This is absolutely scary, and it's actually really sad, really, really sad. Fear is one of the biggest weapons, I feel like, when you like the fear tactic is really limiting you, when your mind is limited, your body is limited, and everything else is limited. And as you said, I don't think anyone should live in this, whether Israeli or not, or Palestinians. And this is now the first time that the world has acknowledged what's going on, although this has been going on for since most of us were born, or all of us were born, except you're like obviously in your late 70s or 80s. And what I always talk about is people who still have their keys to the houses, because the settler thing is one thing I also want to talk to you about. How is that perceived in Israel?
I think that
Settlements.
a lot of the sentiment that I've heard is they lost the war, they need to get over it.
I
Like,
see.
how many times have other countries lost land or resources because of war? Like, they just need to get over it and move on and go somewhere else. That's generally the sentiment that I hear from Israelis about Palestinians. Um, they think that they just need to get over it because they don't know the full details of what happens, especially in the settlements. Um, it's really harmful that they're continuing to expand the settlements. I know that they're trying to build a railroad in between the settlements. They're taking more and more Palestinian land by building walls and security fences and preventing them from going to their olive trees or to other resources that they've had on their land for years and years and generations and generations. I don't think every Israeli is a right-wing, like settler type of person.
Mhm.
Um, Not all of them are that far right as well as the political spectrum or have this kind of desire to go and take more Palestinian land, but nobody's really doing anything to stop it. The government right now is very, very right wing and they're very pro settlements, even though this is an indirect violation of international law. Um,
And,
it's
and,
really
and
difficult.
this is the thing that I don't understand. If law is violated, international law, national law, whatever, we face consequences. And why? I mean, obviously, this is it might sound like a stupid question because we have obviously the biggest giants like America back in this, but why is it okay to commit war crimes? Why is it okay to disobey international law and get away with it? So do you think this is going to change when Bibi's out of office? Or not really? I mean, before he was in office, obviously these things were happening, but what's happening right now is beyond inhumane.
I can only hope that this situation has brought the reality to a lot more people, and that there's going to be a lot more pressure on the International Criminal Court and the UN to discipline Israel and hold it accountable for extreme violations of international law. I think if we are going to have a path forward, whether it be two states or one state, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to undo the wrongs that Israel has done. They've settled the West Bank, they've settled the Upper Golan, they've even settled all the land around Gaza. And I think there needs to be a serious reckoning that'll come in order for things to be made right. And I don't know, without international pressure, how that's going to happen. I don't know how a largely right-wing society is going to democratically elect a government that is different than Bibi. Um, I think international pressure is really the only thing that we have going for us at the moment. I don't think things will change without it.
Insane. One last thing I want to touch on, if you don't mind, is the pinkwashing. So you clearly you have a wife. That means you're part of the LGBTQ. And one of the statements that I hear a lot, oh, well, this is the only country where LGBTQ community is safe and is welcomed. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So because you live in a largely right-wing society, this idea that Israel is like a safe haven for gay people is a myth. I think Tel Aviv can be a safe haven for gays at times, but I'm sure you've heard about the stabbing at the Jerusalem Pride in, I think it was 2015 or 2016.
2015, I
Um,
think, yeah.
and there's been similar events where gay people or people in the LGBTQ community are hate crimed. And on top of that, you're still not allowed to get married there. The only way that your marriage is recognized is if you've come to the country with a marriage from another place. And they, they get the same benefits as a married couple, but it's against the religious authority. So it's not going to be something that ever becomes legal until religious authority is separated from the civil system, which it's not. There is no civil marriage. There is no civil anything. It's all within like these religious leaders' jurisdiction with things like marriage. And a lot of Israelis don't really care about LGBTQ rights because they've voted for people like the Likud party who don't even believe in gay rights. They want to take it away.
Wow. Did you face, you and your wife face any discriminations like firsthand?
We didn't really leave the bubble of Tel Aviv, if I'm being honest. So I
Wow.
didn't really experience a lot of that. Um, I did experience a lot of people, a lot of men specifically, not believing me when I told them that the person I was with was my wife and like continue to make advances on me and flirt with me even after I've said I'm not interested in you. They don't like to, I guess, listen to you when you tell them you're not interested. They're very persistent. Um, so I don't know if that's necessarily like LGBTQ discrimination or if it's just
Mm,
like you're a woman and like I'm attracted to you, so I'm going to ignore everything you're saying until you say
entitlement.
yes. Yeah.
Wow. Do you have anything to add, like anything that I didn't touch on? Because obviously we can do this for forever, and I hope we can do this again at some point. That would be great because I definitely commend you for being vulnerable and speaking up and being genuinely honest with your experiences and what you think. And I can definitely imagine this is not the easiest thing to do, considering you're part of a community after all.
I think it's important to my community, especially, that our religion believes in healing the world. There's a concept called tikkun olam. And in order to heal the world, all people need to be given equal rights and equal opportunities to live a peaceful and meaningful life. And I don't think that if you consider yourself a Jew, if you believe in the tenets of Judaism, that what's happening right now to the Gazans, to Palestinians, isn't anywhere near what our religion wants for the world at large. And I think that we need to step it up. I think that we need to take ownership over the situation, and I think we need to do what's right, whether it directly benefits us or not. I think the moral compass that we all should have needs to be redirected. And I don't think it's ever too late for anybody to speak up, even if they've been a Zionist their whole life, like I was. Like, you should never be afraid to want to learn more and unlearn the things that you've been taught, because it's not just Zionism, you know what I mean? Like, in America, we're taught a fake history. We don't learn about so many things. It's okay if you don't know everything now. And I encourage anybody that wants to learn more to reach out to learn more about it, no matter how, I guess, embarrassing it may be at times, because there's nothing embarrassing about wanting to educate yourself and speak up for what's right.
Wow, that's a very, very strong message. And again, I appreciate you for being here. I appreciate you for speaking up. And I definitely thank you so, so, so much. You did amazing. This is your first podcast?
Yeah.
I love it. You did absolutely great. And I want to say thank you. And I want to say to the audience, thank you for tuning in, wherever you're tuning in from. I hope you guys take this in. I hope you learn from this. And as we see, we're not monoliths, no matter where we come from. You know, not all Israelis, not all Jewish people are the same. Not all Arab people are the same. We're not all villains. And this is a very strong message that Mel had, and it was one of my favorite episodes so far. And all I can say is listen, research, take it in, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So until then, peace.